So, with the recent release of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, I figured, why not just rank all the Marvel movies, all of the Marvel MCU, the MCU movies at least. If I ranked every single Marvel movie, that would be even longer than this video is probably going to be. I originally wanted to do this after Black Widow, but I kind of pushed it off for a while, and I kind of kept forgetting about it, saying I was going to do it, and then I realized, oh, Shang-Chi's coming out. So, why not just do it then, kind of just make it a little bit easier for myself. Will I do another one of these ranking videos for Eternals and No Way Home? Probably. Will they change? More than likely. So, this is my overall thoughts on the MCU right now. I do enjoy it for the most part. There are some movies I just don't really care for. I'm going to try to go through all the movies. Try not to give, too in-depth of an analysis of the movie. Just kind of give some brief thoughts about each movie, because there's 25 of them. I gotta get through them all quickly. So let's just start off at my number 25, and the worst MCU movie, in my opinion, is Thor: The Dark World. This is the only one that I just can't get through. I really just can't get through this movie. Aside from the stuff with Thor and Loki, everything else in this movie is bad. Natalie Portman and Kat Dennings, they're literally just thrown into this movie for no reason. The villain's very bland. It's very bleak. It's very dull. At least coming off the first Thor, which at least had some comedy that actually worked. This movie was just dull and boring and just kind of forgettable, to be honest. And number 24 is The Incredible Hulk. Another very dull, boring movie. It almost was the bottom one for me, but there are some good things. Like, the most performances are fine, like Edward Norton and William Ross and what was that actor's name who plays Ross in the movie? I forgot. I'm an idiot. So, honestly, it's another forgettable movie. Visually, it didn't really impress me too much. Just kind of a generic movie overall. At number 23, I'm putting Iron Man 2. This one was a disappointment when it first came out, and mainly because they had that big twist very early on that Mickey Rourke is not really the villain, it's really Sam Rockwell is the villain. And I thought that wasn't that impressive, considering Sam Rockwell was not that interesting of a villain in this movie. And Mickey Rourke was just kind of a disappointment throughout. I did like the whole, the reactor arc, where it's like, hey, this thing that's supposed to keep Tony alive is actually killing him. I was like, that's actually very interesting. Did they kind of deal with that? In a way, yes. And, it did introduce Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, so, well, let it slide, I guess. At number 22 is Iron Man 3. Yeah, the Iron Man sequels are not that great. I do commend this one for at least trying to be at least different from the other two Iron Man movies. I do like the whole, PTSD angle of Tony after the Avengers. That works. The movie works for about 2/3. And then that twist happened. And it was a letdown. It was just kind of a letdown from there on out. The only reason this movie ranks above Iron Man 2 for me is because at least the twist comes later instead of the twist coming earlier, like Iron Man 2. At number 21, I'm putting Black Widow. This was a movie that I was also kind of disappointed by, although Florence Pugh was really great as Yelena Belova. Everyone in this movie is really good, and if you're working together, it's really good. The action is okay at best, but it just never really blew me away. I just didn't really think the story was that interesting. Didn't think the villains were that interesting. And, yeah, I kind of forgot most of it. I'll probably buy the Blu-ray still because I own all the MCU movies. I don't know, I have a problem. At number 20, I'm putting Captain Marvel. No matter where I put this movie on this list, people are going to be mad. Like, why is that not at the bottom? Like, why is this so high up? I don't know. Personally, this movie only works when it doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, there are small moments, like the stuff with Stan Lee, or maybe a little moment between Captain Marvel and Nick Fury. Other than that, this movie's kind of dull. It has a very dull villain with Jude Law. It's just kind of boring, and I hope they do better with the Marvels, mainly because they got a different director involved with this one. At number 19 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. This one kind of underwhelmed me for a lot of reasons, and I don't know if it's because it came out after Infinity War, but I didn't like the way this movie looked. It looked kind of dull and gray throughout the most part. Also, they kind of give away a lot of the action scenes in the trailer, like the Hello Kitty Pez dispenser. That would have been really great if they didn't spoil that in the trailer. Also, I kind of didn't like how they treated Paul Rudd in this movie. I kind of thought, like, in the first one, he was at least smart. Like, maybe not as smart as Hank Pym, but, like, at least kind of, like, intellectually close enough that could be like, maybe you aren't just, like, some random criminal. No, this one, they just kind of treat him like a doofus throughout the entire movie. It doesn't really work for me. I just didn't think it was that great. Also, kind of a generic villain in this one with, the ghost character. It didn't work for me. Also, Lawrence Fishburne was kind of a letdown in this movie, too. I don't know. I just didn't really care for this one as much as I enjoyed the first Ant-Man movie. So, there's that. At number 18, I'm putting Doctor Strange. This movie, most of the performances are really good. Benedict Cumberbatch is great. Benedict Wong is good. Chiwetel Ejiofor is good. Tilda Swinton's good. Visually, this may be one of the best Marvel movies ever. Story-wise, it was just every kind of Marvel movie out there. It had the same kind of setup. It had the same kind of villains. It had the same, outcomes, obviously. It was at that point where I think after Doctor Strange came out, they were like, okay, no more origin stories. People are done with that. And Doctor Strange was that was it for me. I was just done with all these origin stories. At least other ones that came out afterwards, like Captain Marvel, Black Panther, they weren't just origin stories, but they were kind of the first chapters of these stories. So it kind of got old after a while. I didn't care for the villain in Doctor Strange. I didn't care for Rachel McAdams in this movie. I just didn't really care too much for it. Again, visually impressive. I'm really curious as to how, Doctor Strange will do in No Way Home and how Multiverse of Madness will do, especially considering Sam Raimi is involved in that movie. So we'll see about that. At number 17 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This was a movie that I have a weird history with. When I first saw this movie, I kind of didn't get why so many people hated it. I loved a lot of it. I loved the jokes, I loved the characters, I loved the villain. I loved a lot of this movie. So much so that I actually saw it again in theaters, and I still loved it. And then I rewatched it again to kind of prepare myself for End Game a couple years ago. And then I saw all the problems. There was too many villains in this movie. Obviously, Kurt Russell is the main villain. I thought he was really good. But the other villains, no, I just didn't care for any of the other ones. And even though, the whole Rocket, Groot, and Yondu subplot was kind of funny, at least, especially with that scene with the arrow and, come a little bit closer. That was an awesome scene. It's kind of pointless, honestly. A lot of this is just kind of pointless, and it kind of just distracts from the main story of, Peter and his dad. It was kind of a mess, and it kind of tried to go too big, and it kind of failed. It basically was the opposite of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, which I'll address. At number 16, Avengers Age of Ultron. This one, I honestly wanted to put this in the middle, but the more I thought of it, I'm like, no, I can't. I really just can't. The problem with this movie, it was obvious. They're trying to set up all these other Marvel movies before they even finish this one. It just didn't work out as well as they thought they did. Ultron was really good, I'll give them that. And the chemistry between the Avengers is not nearly as strong as the first movie. I didn't mind the whole Hulk and Black Widow romance for a bit. It just kind of needed a little more context to that. It's all of a sudden they're dating now. Okay. Yeah, it seems alright. Why do people have an issue with this? I don't know. But, yeah, it was kind of a letdown overall. There were some good performances, mainly Paul Bettany's turn as Vision in this one. Overall, kind of a letdown overall, but there are a lot of letdowns in the MCU, I just realized. At number 15, I'm putting Captain America the First Avenger. Again, kind of just another generic superhero origin story. The action's fine. Chris Evans is fine as Captain America. The other performances are fine as well, like Haley Atwell, Hugo Weaving as the villain. But it just mainly served to be the Avengers teaser trailer, and it did its purpose. So, there's that. At number 14, I'm putting the very first Thor movie. I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I enjoyed a lot of the comedy, I enjoyed a lot of the mythology, I enjoyed the performances. Didn't really care for some of the comedy from Kat Dennings. It just kind of didn't work for me. And the whole romance with Natalie Portman just kind of seemed forced. And I hope they make her character more relevant in Thor Love and Thunder. But I do think it gets too much of a bad rep, but I can understand why some people don't like it as much as some of the other MCU movies. At number 13, I'm putting Ant-Man. This was a movie that I was immediately dreading. because Edgar Wright, who was supposed to direct this movie, he dropped out, even though this was like a passion project for him. He dropped out because they wanted him to throw in all these MCU references. He didn't want to do it. And I was kind of worried about that because they got a director who was not on the scale of Edgar Wright, at least in my opinion. They got Peyton Reed, the director of movies such as Bring It On and Yes Man. It just didn't... It seemed like it was going to be Marvel's first big disaster. And I'm really glad this movie wasn't a disaster. It was a lot of fun. A lot of the performances are really good. There was a lot of surprises throughout this entire movie. And it's like one of those... It's a smaller scale MCU movie that's fun as well. I'll give it that. At number 12 is Black Panther. Now, visually, I don't really love this movie too much. I think the performances in this movie are incredible across the board. Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, Lupita Nyong'o, Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera. I'm probably mispronouncing a couple of those names, and I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. A lot of the performances are really good. It does have a lot of interesting questions about, if you have power, like, what are you doing with it? Is it, like, if you're... Like, who's a hero, who's a villain. And I kind of like that angle in this movie. Again, performances are really good throughout the entire movie, and rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. At number 11, I'm putting Shang-Chi. Now, surprisingly, really high up on my list, mainly because I just saw this one, and maybe it's just because it's the most recent one, and I have a high from that. I don't know how Black Widow is so low then. Who cares? I didn't really care for that one. But Shang-Chi, I thought that was really good. I thought the performance was really good. I thought they really worked with each other. I love the dynamic between all the characters, mainly Shang-Chi and Wenwu. That was really good. Visually, it's just not too impressive. It's just kind of a generic final battle overall. And I kind of hope that, even though, a lot of the action scenes are really cool in this movie, maybe work on the visual effects. At least the CGI could at least be better. I'm just kind of thinking now, that creature without a face, I'm just worried, what kind of face would they add to that? I'm having bad thoughts now. But overall, Shang-Chi, I thought it was a lot of fun. It was very funny. It was very well done, well handled. They handled a lot of the situations seriously, even though I mentioned it's just funny. It kind of one of those movies where it's I don't know if I'm going to like this one so much because the trailers just didn't really blow me away, and then I actually really enjoyed it. At number 10, and while we're at number 9, I'm going to combine these two to kind of because these movies kind of flip-flop for me. Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home, because these two movies have things that work in their own separate movies, but not in the other ones. Some things work in Homecoming that don't work in Far From Home, and vice versa. So with Homecoming, I really like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I don't know if he's as good as Tobey Maguire, but he's better than Andrew Garfield. I do like the villain, Michael Keaton, in this one. I don't know if I really love the whole, his mentor as Iron Man thing. It works in the movie, but I don't know if I really like that angle overall. But I still think it works. As far as Far From Home goes, I do like, how Peter's kind of dealing with the whole situation. Jake Gyllenhaal's an alright villain, but I don't think he's as good as Michael Keaton. And also, I don't really like how they handle the whole, the snap, the post-snap, where it's oh, the snap was tragic. And then all of a sudden, and then 5 years later, they all appeared. It's it kind of made it seem like a joke. And that was a traumatizing event for a lot of people, and they kind of made it a joke. I didn't like that. But overall, I kind of flip-flop on these two movies, to be honest. One has a better story, one has better visuals, one has a better villain, one has a better arc for the character. They kind of flip-flop for me, and it's some days I'll be oh, I like Homecoming more than Far From Home, and sometimes I like Far From Home more than Homecoming. But overall, I can't complain because I like both of them. At number 8 is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, pretty much everything that I said about Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is pretty much the exact opposite. I love the dynamic between the characters. It's really great. It's really funny. It's really believable. It's energetic. Has a lot of energy. It's fun. It's visually impressive. Very generic villain overall. Didn't really care for that. Didn't really care for Ronan. It was kind of one of the bland ones. But overall, it was a lot of fun. I had a blast with Guardians of the Galaxy. And at number 7, I'm putting Thor Ragnarok. This was another movie that's kind of hey, we saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Let's do that and make it even more zany. And it really works, even though like there's a lot of serious scenes like the ending and obviously Odin's death in this movie. It still works. Kate Blanchett is a crazy villain in this movie. I really liked her in this movie. I really liked the comedy in this movie. I thought it worked. A lot of the new characters in this movie that I thought were good, like Kate Blanchett, Tessa Thompson. Even though they threw on Mark Ruffalo, not really a new character, obviously, but I thought he kind of worked for this movie overall. I had a lot of fun with Thor Ragnarok. It's my favorite of the Thor movies, and I'm kind of curious what they'll do with Love and Thunder, but I have faith in Taika Waititi, so I'll give him that. And number 6 is Iron Man, the MCU movie that started it all. This was a movie that I was kind of thinking, probably going to be a failure. And then overall, the movie, I do enjoy it. I love Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this movie. I do think it's kind of like, it kind of reminded me a lot of Batman Begins, maybe in a negative way, but and kind of like it's more of a grounded superhero movie, but it still has like that Marvel, kind of like I don't know. It kind of like, imagine like if Spider-Man, the 2002 movie, and Batman Begins kind of fused together to make a movie. It kind of works that way. Also really like Jeff Bridges in the movie. I thought he was a very good villain. Overall, I do like Iron Man overall. Maybe it's a little slow in parts, but other than that, it's still really good. At number 5, I'm putting Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This was the movie that kind of elevated the MCU, introduced us to the new version of Bucky, and introduced us to Falcon, and has a really great team up of, Captain America, Black Widow, Nick Fury. A lot of the action scenes are a lot better. The villains, again, are fine. Bucky's a villain, but not really. You've seen the movie. And I do like the spy angle that they're kind of going with this. It's more of a conspiracy thriller rather than just a straightforward action movie, and I thought that was very interesting. And while that turn is interesting, I do admit it's a little slow at times. This movie's about 2 hours, 15 minutes, even with the end credits scene. But overall, it's a nice change of pace considering the rest of the MCU. At number 4, I'm putting Avengers Infinity War. Some people are going to be really mad that Avengers Infinity War is only number 4. But I don't care. I have problems with this movie. I still really like this movie. There's some things that I just don't really care about in this movie, to be honest. Mainly, I don't like the whole, every time that there's a serious situation that happens, there's always a funny scene. Loki dies in the beginning, and then there's this scene with Tony and Pepper talking about their future. It's kind of supposed to be charming and funny. It just kind of came off as awkward. And, the whole, Thanos kills Gamora at one point, and then it cuts to, Rhodey kind of making fun of Hulk and hey, when we go to Wakanda, make sure you kneel in front of Black Panther. Okay, and he does that. It's I can't really laugh at a lot of those scenes because a lot of those scenes they're just forced. They're just not that funny. And it's just coming off of very serious things. Even after the snap, they have that whole scene with Nick Fury and Maria Hill, and he's summoning Captain Marvel, and it's supposed to be a joke because he's about to curse. Again, I just don't like that they do that in these movies, and this is probably the worst example of it, unfortunately. I'm being negative on this movie, but I still really like this movie. I do like the team-ups in this movie. I do like the action in this movie. I do like, how it's been it's 10 years since this is the moment we've been waiting for this movie. We've been waiting for this movie, along with End Game, and I'll talk about that soon. But I do think it's one of the most, obviously, traumatizing considering the ending, but even though a lot of those people did come back, a lot of the performances are really good, some of the best in the MCU. I really like this movie. At number 3, I'm putting Captain America Civil War. Now, I do like this movie because it kind of makes you understand where both Iron Man and Captain America are coming from, but it never really asks you to choose a side in their issues. And it's just hey, we understand you. We understand why you're going through this. We understand why you feel this way. And it never really villainizes either of them, even though they kind of just slowly begin to hate each other throughout this entire movie. There's a lot of action scenes that really work, like the airport scene and the final scene between Iron Man and Captain America and Winter Soldier. That was really cool. Got a lot of introductions, including Black Panther and Spider-Man. This is one of those where it's this feels like a game-changing MCU movie. It's one of my favorite MCU movies, honestly, as evidenced by this video. At number 2, I'm putting the very first Avengers movie. Again, another movie we've been waiting for years. It all finally came together in this one movie. And this whole thing could have ended just here. But no, they had to continue. And I don't blame them, to be honest. But this was this was a lot of fun. It's not necessarily the greatest or, most thoughtful movie ever made, but it's kind of worth it. Finally getting to see all these characters that we've been seeing in all these other movies just finally come together for once. It's awesome. Loki as the villain, he was better in Thor. He was better here than he was in Thor. That's what I meant to say. But I really like this. I enjoy this movie. This is the perfect definition of a popcorn flick. And yeah, even though I don't want to mention the director, obviously, I still really enjoy this movie quite a bit. And my favorite MCU movie, Avengers End Game. I really like this movie overall. I really like how, even though this obviously isn't the last MCU movie, it just feels like it is. It feels like it's kind of like a series finale in some ways. And a lot of the performances in this movie are really good, particularly from Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, some of the best of pretty much everyone in this movie. I do like the callbacks to a lot of the movies, because a lot of movies these days, they just kind of just blatantly just throw out references to whatever they're doing. But this one just feels more natural. It just feels like it's just like if you watched all the MCU movies to prepare for this movie, you were not disappointed. Almost everything works. There's one or two things that just don't work. Even though they take all the PTSD seriously of all the remaining Avengers after the snap, maybe not so much with Thor. I think they could have done a lot better with that, because what he's going through, that's also really serious, and they just didn't do that. Other than that, I do like this movie. I love this movie. A lot of the action scenes are really cool. The main are great. The ending, oh my god. Just that ending alone is worth it. Worth sitting through all these movies for. It's an incredible achievement. It's a movie we've been waiting for years, and it happened, and it could have easily been a disaster. And it just wasn't. It was amazing. It was heartbreaking. It was everything that I imagined this movie would be, and more. So, that's my ranking of the MCU for right now. It's probably going to change when Eternals comes out, but right now that's kind of just how I feel about the MCU as a whole. About the movies, about the characters, if I mentioned any. I feel like I didn't. But overall, I do enjoy the MCU, even though I have problems with pretty much all the movies at some point. But I'm not going to deny that the MCU is at least, it's enjoyable, and it's essentially game-changing in a lot of ways. So that's my list. How would you rank the MCU movies? I'm really curious. Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat, and stay safe.